Number: the Union Pacific Depot in Laramie. Wyoming Territory stood like a weathered monument to arrivals and departures. Its wooden platform worn smooth by 10,000 boots and just as many goodbyes. On this October morning in 1885, and frost still clung to the iron rails, while the first rays of sun painted the distant mountains. Gold, steam from the departed, 6:15, eastbound, still hung in the air like ghosts of journeys taken. Clara pressed herself smaller into the corner of the wooden bench, her thin arms wrapped around a flour sack that held everything she owned in the world. The bench was hard and cold through her patched dress, but she'd learned that staying still made you invisible. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant people walked past without seeing the dirt under your fingernails or the tear in your stockings that she'd tried to mend with thread that didn't quite match. She'd been sitting there since before dawn, when the stars still watched over the empty platform. The woman who'd brought her, not her mother, never her mother, just the latest in a string of reluctant guardians, had gripped her shoulder hard enough to leave marks. "You sit here and don't move," she'd hissed, her breath sharp with last night's whiskey. "Someone will come for you." But Clara knew better. She was 10 years old and had already learned that promises were just pretty lies adults told to make leaving easier. The platform began to fill as the morning wore on. Businessmen in dark suits checked their pocket watches. Women in traveling clothes supervised the loading of trunks. Children, real children with parents who held their hands, chattered excitedly about their destinations. Clara pulled her feet up onto the bench, making herself even smaller. A ghost girl that the morning light passed through without warming. Inside her sack, her fingers found the piece of bread, hard as a rock now, but still food, and the folded paper. She'd memorized the words in the gray pre-dawn light. "Her name is Clara. Please don't let her go hungry." 23 words. That's all she was worth. 23 words and a bench at a train station. Thomas Reid stood at the far end of the platform, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. At 42, he moved with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that sudden movements could shatter what was already broken. His clothes were well made but worn. The black wool coat had been brushed so many times it shone at the elbows. And his boots, though polished, showed the inevitable scuffs of ranch work. He'd come to town for supplies. Nothing more. Salt for preserving. Coffee. Perhaps some penny candy for. He stopped the thought before it could fully form. Old habits died hard, even after 3 years. But something made him pause as he passed the bench where a small figure huddled. Maybe it was the way she held herself, that particular stillness of a child who'd learned that being noticed usually meant trouble. Or perhaps it was the flour sack clutched against her chest like armor against the world. Whatever it was, Thomas found himself slowing, then stopping. The girl didn't look up. She'd perfected the art of not seeing, of being present but absent. There but not there. Thomas knew that feeling. He'd lived it every day since Margaret and little Sarah had been taken by the fever. 3 years of being a ghost in his own life. Going through the motions of living while feeling nothing at all. A piece of paper lay on the bench beside her, weighted down by a small stone. The morning breeze caught its edge, making it flutter like a wounded bird. Without thinking, Thomas reached for it. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes, brown and far too knowing for a child, meeting his for just a moment before dropping again. "Pardon me," he said quietly, the way he'd speak to a spooked horse, just keeping it from blowing away. He lifted the paper, expecting perhaps a train schedule or forgotten letter, but the words, written in a careful, "Despérate" hand, hit him like a physical blow. "Her name is Clara. Please don't let her go hungry." Thomas looked from the paper to the girl, Clara, and felt something crack inside his chest. Not break. Exactly. But crack. Like ice beginning to thaw after a long, brutal winter. Here was abandonment reduced to its simplest terms. Here was a child with nothing but a name and a plea for the most basic human kindness. He cleared his throat. And then, without quite knowing why, Thomas Reid did something that would change both their lives forever. He read the note aloud. "Her name is Clara. Please don't let her go hungry." His voice carried across the platform, cutting through the morning bustle like a bell. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The comfortable anonymity of the crowd dissolved as people actually looked. Really looked. At the small girl on the bench. Clara shrank back, her eyes wide with terror. This was wrong. This was all wrong. She was supposed to be invisible. That's how you survived. That's how you kept from being hurt. But the man with the sad eyes and gentle voice had torn away her invisibility like pulling off a bandage, leaving her exposed and raw in the morning light. The silence that followed Thomas's words seemed to stretch forever, though it probably lasted only seconds. Then came the predictable responses, the whispers, the shifting feet, the suddenly averted gazes of people who didn't want to be involved in something so unseemly as a child. Abandoned with nothing but a note. "Someone should fetch the sheriff," muttered a woman in a green traveling suit. "Probably a trick," said another. "These street children, they'll say anything for a meal." But Thomas wasn't listening to them. He was watching Clara, seeing how she seemed to fold in on herself with each whispered word, becoming smaller and smaller as if she could simply disappear through sheer force of will. He knew that feeling too, the wish to simply cease existing when the world became too much to bear. Moving slowly, he folded the note and held it out to her. "This is yours," he said quietly. Clara's hand darted out like a small bird, snatching the paper and clutching it against her chest along with her sack. Her eyes remained fixed on his boots. Good boots, she noticed, but worn. Not the boots of a man who'd hurt her for sport. "Clara," Thomas said, testing the name gently. "That's a pretty name. I knew a Clara once. Back in Ohio. She made the best apple pie in 3 counties. The girl's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and a flush crept up her thin cheeks. Thomas pretended not to notice, but he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. "I was going to eat this on the train," he said conversationally, "but I find I'm not hungry just yet. Would you mind holding on to it for me?" He set the package on the bench between them, not too close, giving her space. Clara ate it suspiciously. In her experience, nothing came free. There was always a price, always a catch. But the smell of fresh bread and cheese was making her mouth water. "No tricks," Thomas said, reading her hesitation. "Just food." Slowly, as if approaching a trap, Clara reached for the package. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it, revealing thick slices of bread with cheese and even, wonder of wonders, a slice of ham. She wanted to devour it, but habit made her pause, looking up at him questioningly. "Go on," he encouraged. "Can't have good food going to waste." She ate carefully, trying not to appear too eager. But Thomas could see the hunger in every movement. How long since her last real meal? Days? Longer? The thought made something twist in his chest. While she ate, he turned slightly away, giving her privacy, while keeping her in his peripheral vision. The platform had returned to its normal bustle, though a few people still shot curious glances their way. Thomas ignored them, instead, finding himself really looking at the girl for the first time. She was small for what he guessed was 9 or 10 years, with brown hair that might have shown if it were clean and properly brushed. Her dress had been mended multiple times with whatever thread was available, creating a patchwork of repairs that spoke of poverty but also of someone, somewhere, who had cared enough to try. Her shoes were too large, stuffed with newspaper to make them fit, but it was her eyes that caught him, brown and watchful. holding a wariness that no child should possess. Eyes that had seen too much, expected too little, and learned to be grateful for even the smallest kindness. When she finished eating, she carefully folded the brown paper and tucked it into her sack. Nothing wasted. Everything saved. Thomas recognized the gesture. He'd seen it in soldiers during the war, in homesteaders after bad harvests, in anyone who'd learned that tomorrow's hunger was always just around the corner. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You're welcome," he replied just as quietly. Then, after a pause, "Where were you headed? On the trains?" "I mean," Clara shrugged. "A tiny movement. Wherever someone would take me, I suppose." The casual despair in those words hit harder than tears would have. Thomas found himself thinking of Sarah, who would have been about this age now. Sarah, who had trusted him to keep her safe and warm and fed. Sarah, who he'd failed. "And the person who left you here?" he asked carefully. "Mrs. Garrett. She said she couldn't keep me anymore. Said I ate too much and didn't earn my keep." Clara's voice was matter-of-fact, as if being discarded was simply something that happened. Like rain or winter cold. Thomas felt anger rise in his throat, not at the child, but at a world where a little girl could speak of abandonment with such resigned acceptance. He swallowed it down. Anger wouldn't help her now. "Well," he said finally, "I find myself in something of a predicament. You see, I've got a ranch about 15 miles north of here. Nothing fancy. Just cattle and horses and more work than one man can handle. I could use some help around the place, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, maybe helping with the cooking. The pay wouldn't be much, but there's a warm bed and 3 meals a day." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with suspicion and something that might have been hope. You're offering me work? If you're interested," Thomas said carefully. "It's honest work. And I run a respectable place. My sister Ruth lives in town. She'd vouch for me if you'd like to speak with her first." The mention of a sister seemed to ease some of the tension in Clara's shoulders. She studied his face with those 2 old eyes. Weighing, measuring, deciding. Thomas waited patiently. He understood the need to be careful, to measure twice and cut once when it came to trust. 3 meals? She asked finally. "Every day?" "Every day," he confirmed. "And seconds if you're still hungry." "And I'd have my own bed?" "In the house. Small room off the kitchen. It locks from the inside if that matters to you." It clearly did matter. Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or recognition that he understood why a lock might be important to a young girl who'd been passed from hand to hand like unwanted freight. "What about?" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "What about when I can't work? When I'm sick or if I do something wrong?" The question broke Thomas's heart a little more. What had this child endured that made her plan for punishment before she'd even begun? "Everyone gets sick sometimes," he said gently. "When that happens, you rest and get better. As for doing something wrong, well, we all make mistakes. That's how we learn. No one's ever been thrown out of my house for spilling milk or burning biscuits." Clara absorbed this information like a sponge taking in water. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Why? Why what? Why would you help me? You don't know me." "I'm not." She gestured helplessly at herself. "I'm not anybody special." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe because I believe everyone is somebody special. They just need the chance to show it. Or maybe..." He looked out across the platform, seeing not the morning crowd but another time. Another place. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone and wish someone would see you. Really see you." Clara studied him with those watchful eyes. And Thomas had the unsettling feeling that she saw more than he'd intended to reveal. But she nodded slowly, as if he'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. "I work hard," she said, lifting her chin with a touch of pride. "I'm stronger than I look. And I learn quick. I can read and write some. And I know my numbers. I won't be any trouble." "I'm sure you won't," Thomas said, and meant it. He stood slowly, joints protesting the morning cold. "My wagon's just outside. We can stop by my sister's house if you'd like. Let her know where you'll be. She makes a fuss. But she's good people." Clara stood too, clutching her flour sack. She looked back at the bench that had been her whole world for the past few hours. Then up at Thomas. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Thomas Reid," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "And you're Clara?" "Just Clara," she said. "I don't think I ever had another name. Or if I did, nobody remembered to tell me." "Well, just Clara," Thomas said with a small smile. "I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Shall we go see about that warm bed and those 3 meals a day?" Clara nodded and fell into step beside him, her 2 large shoes making soft shuffling sounds on the platform. As they walked, Thomas noticed she kept glancing up at him, quick little looks as if reassuring herself he was still there, still real. They'd almost reached the station exit when a commotion behind them made them both turn. A woman was running along the platform. Hiskiats hitched up, calling out, "Wait! Oh, please wait." It was the woman in the green traveling suit who'd suggested calling the sheriff. She reached them breathless, her fancy hat askew. Clara shrank back instinctively, but Thomas stepped slightly forward, shielding her. "Ma'am," he said politely but coolly. I saw what you did," she panted, reading the note. Offering her work, she fumbled with her purse. "I want to help. It's not much. But..." She pulled out several bills and tried to press them into Thomas's hand. He didn't take them. "That's kind of you, ma'am. But, please," she interrupted. "I have a daughter at home. She's about this age." When I saw, she looked at Clara with tears in her eyes. "When I saw her sitting there all alone, I thought of my Catherine, and I did nothing. I said cruel things because it was easier than feeling guilty." She held out the money again. "For clothes, shoes that fit, whatever she needs. Please." Thomas looked down at Clara, raising his eyebrows in question. It was her choice. After a long moment, Clara nodded minutely. "Thank you, ma'am," Thomas said, accepting the bills. "That's very generous." "It's not," the woman said firmly. "It's the absolute least I could do." She knelt down to Clara's level. "I'm sorry," she said simply, "for what I said earlier. You deserve better than this world has given you." Clara stared at her, clearly unsure how to respond to an adult apologizing to her. Finally, she whispered, "It's okay." "No," the woman said firmly. "It's not. But maybe it can be better." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "Take care of her, Mr. Reid," Thomas supplied. "And I will." The woman hurried away, leaving Thomas and Clara standing in the morning sun. Clara looked up at him, confusion clear on her face. "People can surprise you sometimes," Thomas said, "not always in bad ways." They continued to his wagon, where his horses stood patiently waiting. Thomas helped Clara up onto the seat, then swung up beside her. As he took the reins, he noticed her clutching her flour sack tightly. "There's a box under the seat," he said casually, "more secure for traveling. Your things would be safer there." Clara hesitated, then carefully placed her sack in the wooden box. All except the note, which she kept in her hand. As they rolled through the streets of Laramie, Thomas pointed out landmarks. The general store where they'd stop for supplies, the church with its white steeple, his sister Ruth's tidy house with the blue shutters. Clara absorbed it all silently, but he could see her beginning to relax incrementally, like a watch spring slowly unwinding. They were just passing the last houses when she spoke again. Mr. Reid? Yes? That lady. She gave you money for me. That she did. What are you going to do with it? Well now, Thomas said thoughtfully. Seems to me that money's yours. What do you think you need? Clara looked down at herself, at the patched dress, the 2 large shoes, the threadbare shawl. Shoes that fit would be nice, she said softly. And maybe a warm coat for winter? Those sound like fine ideas. Ruth knows the best places for such things. We'll see to it this week. This week? Clara repeated wonderingly, as if the idea of planning days ahead was a foreign concept. Then, even softer. Will. Thomas pretended not to notice the way she tested the word. But something warm bloomed in his chest. That's right, he said. Will. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the town giving way to open prairie. The mountains rose in the distance, purple-blue and capped with early snow. Clara's death grip on the bench slowly eased as the rhythmic creak of the wagon and the steady clop of hooves worked their magic. It's pretty out here, she said eventually. Gets prettier the further we go. Thomas replied. Wait until you see the ranch. Nothing fancy. Like I said, but the view from the kitchen window is something special. Mountains in the distance. And in the spring, the whole meadow fills with wildflowers. I've never seen wildflowers, Clara admitted. Not growing wild. Anyway, just in people's gardens, behind fences. Well, you'll see plenty come spring. Indian paintbrush, lupines, montan des. Sarah used to. He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. Sarah? Clara asked tentatively. Thomas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my daughter. She died 3 years ago. The fever took her and her mother both. Oh. Clara absorbed this information, understanding dawning on her face. No wonder he'd stopped to read her note. No wonder he'd offered help to a lost girl. How old was she? 7. Thomas said roughly. She'd be about your age now. Clara nodded slowly. Then, with a wisdom beyond her years. I'm not her. The simple statement, said, without accusation or jealousy. Just quiet understanding. Nearly undid him. Thomas had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. I know that, he said. You're Clara. And that's exactly who you're supposed to be. She thought about this for a while. Then carefully, deliberately, folded the note that had defined her for the past hours and tucked it into her pocket. Not throwing it away, it was still part of her story, but putting it in its place. The past, not the future. As the wagon rolled on through the warming morning, taking them away from the train station and towards something that might, just might, become home, Clara allowed herself the tiniest spark of hope. It wasn't much. She'd learned not to expect much, but it was there, fragile and precious as the first green shoot of spring. Beside her, Thomas Reid drove steady and sure, a man who'd learned that sometimes the greatest gifts came in the most unexpected packages. And in the distance, the mountains stood eternal and patient, waiting to welcome 2 broken hearts that were just beginning to learn they might not have to heal alone. The ranch house appeared just as the sun reached its zenith, nestled in a valley with the mountains standing guard behind it. It wasn't grand, just a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney and a wide porch, but it looked solid, permanent, like it had grown from the earth itself rather than been built upon it. That's home, Thomas said simply, and Clara heard the quiet pride in his voice. As they drew closer, she could see the outbuildings, a barn painted red, a chicken coop, what looked like a smokehouse. Everything was neat and well maintained. But there was something indefinably lonely about it. as if the buildings themselves were waiting for voices to fill them again. "It's bigger than I thought," Clara said. "Feels too big most days." Thomas admitted. "House was built for a family. These days it's just me and too many empty rooms." A dog came bounding out to meet them, tail wagging furiously. It was a shepherd mix, black and brown with one white ear, and it danced around the wagon barking joyfully. "That's Patch," Thomas said. "Don't mind his noise, he's all greeting. No guarding. Probably lick a thief to death before he'd bite one." The dog proved him right by immediately trying to climb into the wagon to investigate Clara. She laughed, as the dog's enthusiastic greeting nearly knocked her off the bench. It was the first time Thomas had heard her laugh, and the sound was like water in the desert. "He likes you," Thomas observed. "I like him too," Clara said, rubbing Patch's ears. The dog's tail wagged so hard, his whole back end moved with it. They pulled up to the house, and Thomas helped Clara down from the wagon. She stood for a moment, looking around with those watchful eyes, taking in everything: the swept porch, the stack of firewood, the kitchen garden gone to seed with the coming winter. "Come on," Thomas said gently. "Let's get you settled." The inside of the house was exactly what Clara had expected, and yet nothing like it at all. Clean and sparse. Yes, but with unexpected touches of softness: curtains at the windows, a braided rug before the fireplace, dried flowers in a vase on the mantel. A woman's touches, preserved like museum pieces. "Kitchen's through here," Thomas said, leading the way. "And this?" He opened a door off the kitchen to reveal a small room. "This would be yours." It had clearly been a storage room, but Thomas must have cleaned it out in anticipation of hiring help someday. There was a narrow bed with a quilted cover, a small dresser, and, true to his word, a bolt on the inside of the door. The window looked out toward the barn, and afternoon light streamed in, making the simple space seem warm and welcoming. "It's perfect," Clara breathed, and Thomas could tell she meant it. This girl who'd been sleeping, who knows where, who owned nothing but what fit in a flour sack, looked at the tiny room like it was a palace. "Good," he said gruffly. "You get settled. I'll see about some lunch." He left her to explore her new domain and busied himself in the kitchen. The familiar actions of building up the fire and setting water to boil helped steady him. What had he done? Bringing this child here? What did he know about raising a girl, especially one who'd clearly been through things no child should experience? But then he heard her voice, soft and wondering, talking to Patch, who'd followed her into her room. "Look at this," she was saying. "A whole drawer just for my things. And the bed has sheets and everything." The simple joy in her voice over basic necessities made his decision for him. He might not know what he was doing, but he could offer her safety, food, and shelter. The rest they'd figure out as they went. When Clara emerged from her room, she'd washed her face and hands and attempted to tidy her hair. The effort she'd made touched him, this attempt at presenting herself well in her new home. "I thought we'd keep it simple today," he said, setting out bread, cheese, and apples. "Tomorrow we can do proper cooking." "I can cook some," Clara offered eagerly. "Mrs. Garrett taught me. Said if I was going to eat her food, I'd better learn to make it." "That's good to know. Truth is, I'm a terrible cook. Been living on beans and biscuits so long, I've probably forgotten what real food tastes like." They ate in companionable silence, Patch stationed hopefully under the table. Finally, Clara asked, "What would my work be? You mentioned chickens and eggs." "Well," Thomas leaned back, considering, "morning chores would be gathering eggs, feeding the chickens, maybe help with milking. I've got 2 cows out in the pasture. Inside work would be what you're comfortable with: cooking, cleaning, mending, if you're handy with a needle, nothing too heavy or hard." You're not a servant. Clara. You're. Well, your help. There's a difference. What's the difference? Thomas thought about it. Servants do what they're told and keep quiet about it. Help gets to have opinions. Make suggestions. Tell me when I'm being foolish. Help gets to be part of things. Not just around them. Clara digested this. And if I have an opinion, then I'd like to hear it. She looked at him skeptically, and he could see her weighing his words against her experience. How many adults had told her pretty lies? How many had promised one thing and delivered another? Try me, he said simply. Clara straightened in her chair. I think, she said carefully, watching his face, that you need curtains in the kitchen, and maybe some flowers on the table. It's too. She searched for the word. Empty in here? Thomas looked around the kitchen, seeing it through her eyes. She was right. In his grief, he'd let the house become functional but not homely. Margaret would have hated it. You're right, he said. What else? Emboldened. Clara continued. The garden needs cleaning up before winter. And there's a board loose on the porch that someone's going to trip over. And... She hesitated. Go on. You need to eat better. Real food. Not just whatever's easy. That's not good for you. Thomas found himself smiling. Really smiling. For the first time in longer than he could remember. Opinions indeed. All right. Miss Clara. You've got the job of civilizing this place. Think you're up for it? She nodded solemnly. But he could see the pleased light in her eyes. I'll do my best. Mr. Reid. I know you will. And Clara? It's just Thomas. Mr. Reid was my father. And he was a much more respectable man than I am. Thomas, she repeated, testing the informality. Then, daringly, does that mean you'll help with the curtains? He laughed, surprising them both. I suppose it does. That afternoon, he showed her around the property. The barn where his horses shifted sleepily in their stalls. The chicken coop where the hens clucked and fussed. The root cellar stocked for winter. The well with its sweet, cold water. Clara absorbed it all, asking questions about everything. How many chickens? What are the horses' names? How far to the nearest neighbor? What grows in the garden? Thomas answered patiently, enjoying her curiosity. It had been so long since anyone had shown interest in the ranch. In his life here, he found himself seeing it fresh through her eyes, not as a monument to loss, but as a working ranch with potential and purpose. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they stood on the porch watching the day end. Clara had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, one of Margaret's that Thomas had found and offered. She clutched it like armor, but her face was peaceful. Thank you, she said suddenly. For what? For reading my note. For seeing me. For... She gestured helplessly at everything around them. For taking a chance. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Maybe we're taking a chance on each other, he said finally. That's what people do. I think. Take chances. Hope for the best. Help each other along the way. Clara nodded, filing this away with all the other new things she was learning. Then, practical as always, what time do you want breakfast? Whenever the sun and the roosters wake us, Thomas said. Usually around dawn. But tomorrow, sleep as late as you need. You've had a long day. Every day's been long lately, Clara said softly, then, squaring her shoulders. But tomorrow will be better. Yes, Thomas agreed, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. I believe it will be. As they went inside, leaving the vast Wyoming sky to its nightly show, neither of them noticed the slip of paper that had fallen from Clara's pocket, the note that had brought them together. The wind caught it, carrying it up and away into the darkness. where it dissolved into the night like a prayer that had finally been answered. They didn't need it anymore. They had found what they were both looking for: a place to belong, a person to trust, and the beginning of something that might, with time and care and patience, grow into family. The house settled around them, creaking gently in the cooling air, no longer empty, but filled with possibility. And in her small room off the kitchen, Clara carefully hung her few belongings in the wardrobe, placed her flour sack in the drawer, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, looked forward to tomorrow. 3 weeks had passed since Clara arrived at the ranch, and the transformation was remarkable, not just in the house, which now sported cheerful yellow curtains and fresh flowers on every table, but in its inhabitants. Clara had filled out slightly, no longer looking like a strong wind might blow her away. Her cheeks had color, her eyes had lost some of their wariness, and she moved through the house with growing confidence. Thomas, for his part, found himself looking forward to coming in from the range each evening. The house no longer felt like a tomb preserving his grief, but like a home again, one filled with the small sounds of life. Clara humming as she cooked, Patch's nails clicking on the floor, the comfortable conversation over supper. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Thomas had ridden out early to check on the cattle in the far pasture, leaving Clara to her usual morning routines. She was in the garden, clearing the last of the dead plants before the ground froze solid, when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, riding fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun. 3 riders were coming down the road, and something about their urgency made her stomach clench with old, familiar fear. The lead rider was a woman, well-dressed but disheveled, as if she'd thrown on her clothes in haste. Behind her rode 2 men, one in a sheriff's star that caught the light, the other in the black coat of a lawyer or banker. Clara's first instinct was to run, to hide, to become invisible as she'd learned to do. But this was her home now, hers and Thomas's, and she wouldn't shame him by cowering. She stood her ground as the riders pulled up at the gate, though her hands trembled as she gripped the garden fork. "You there, girl?" the woman called out, not even dismounting. "Where is Thomas Reid?" "He's out with the cattle, ma'am," Clara replied, proud that her voice stayed steady. "Can I help you?" The woman's eyes narrowed as she took in Clara's appearance. The clean dress, the healthy color, the defensive posture. "You're the orphan he took in, the one from the train station." It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. "I work here, ma'am. I'm the help." "Help?" The woman spat the word like it tasted bad. "Is that what he's calling it?" The sheriff dismounted, his expression uncomfortable. "Now, Mrs. Morrison, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm Sheriff Banks," he said to Clara, his voice kinder. "This is Mrs. Morrison and Mr. Hartley from the bank. We need to speak with Mr. Reid. Do you know when he'll return?" "By noon, usually," Clara said. Then, gathering her courage, "What's this about?" Mrs. Morrison's laugh was sharp and bitter. "What's it about?" "It's about propriety, young lady. It's about a grown man taking in a young girl with no chaperone. No proper arrangements. It's about the scandal of it all." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "There's nothing improper. A man and a girl, living alone together? What else would you call it?" Mrs. Morrison's voice rose. "My husband sits on the town council. We have standards to maintain. We can't have this sort of thing going on." "What sort of thing?" The quiet voice came from behind them. Thomas had returned early, drawn by some instinct that trouble was brewing. He sat his horse easily, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Thomas Reid." Mrs. Morrison wheeled her horse to face him. "You should be ashamed of yourself, taking in this." This child. What would Margaret think? The use of his dead wife's name made Thomas go very still. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Margaret would think I was helping a child in need, which is exactly what I'm doing. Without proper supervision? Without a woman in the house? Mrs. Morrison was building steam now. It's indecent. What's indecent? Thomas said, dismounting slowly. Is leaving a child alone at a train station with nothing but a note begging someone to keep her from starving. What's indecent is a world where that can happen, and people like you care more about appearances than about that child's welfare. Sheriff Banks stepped forward, clearly trying to defuse the situation. Thomas, nobody's questioning your intentions, but you have to understand how it looks. A single man, a young girl. I understand perfectly, Thomas said. I understand that Clara was abandoned, hungry, and alone. I understand that I offered her honest work and a safe place to stay. I understand that she's thrived here, and that should matter more than what the gossips think. Mr. Hartley, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. There's also the matter of the loan. Mr. Reid, your mortgage payment is coming due, and the bank has concerns about your stability. Clara gasped. She hadn't known about any loan, any mortgage. The thought that her presence might cost Thomas his ranch made her feel sick. My stability? Thomas's voice was ice. I've never missed a payment in 15 years. No, but... Hartley shifted uncomfortably. The board feels that a man who would make such questionable decisions might not be reliable. Questionnable décision. Thomas repeated the words slowly, as if tasting their bitterness. You mean the decision to help a child? There are proper channels. Mrs. Morrison interjected. Orphanages. Institutions. Where she'd be worked like a slave or worse. Thomas cut her off. I've seen those places. No child deserves that. Clara found her voice. Mr. Reid saved me, she said, stepping forward. He's been nothing but kind and proper. I have my own room. It locks from the inside. He's never... She stopped, face flaming, unable to voice what they were implying. Of course. You'd defend him. Mrs. Morrison said dismissively. You'd say anything to keep your comfortable position? That did it. Clara's fear transformed into anger, not the hot, wild anger of a child, but the cold, determined anger of someone who'd seen too much to tolerate more injustice. Comfortable? She said, her voice steady. You want to know what comfortable is? Comfortable is knowing where your next meal is coming from. Comfortable is having shoes that fit and clothes without holes. Comfortable is going to bed without wondering if you'll be thrown out in the morning because someone decided you're too much trouble. She took a breath, aware that all eyes were on her. Mr. Reid gave me work and dignity. He treats me like a person, not a burden. If that's scandalous to you, then maybe you need to look at what kind of person you are, not what kind he is. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Mrs. Morrison seemed taken aback by Clara's eloquence and passion. Finally, Sheriff Banks spoke. Thomas, what if there was a woman here too? Someone to act as chaperone? Make everything proper? I won't turn Clara out to satisfy busybodies. Thomas said flatly. No. I mean. Banks looked uncomfortable. My sister's been looking for a position. She could come during the day, help with the house, provide a proper female presence. Would that satisfy everyone's concerns? Mrs. Morrison sniffed. It would be better than nothing. I suppose. Thomas looked at Clara, raising his eyebrows in question. It was her home too now. She should have a say. Clara thought quickly. Another woman in the house might mean more rules, more watching, less freedom. But if it meant Thomas could keep his ranch and she could stay, that would be acceptable, she said formally. Good. Good, Sheriff Banks said, clearly relieved. I'll speak to Mary today. She can start tomorrow if that suits. And the mortgage? Thomas asked Hartley pointedly. The banker shifted. If there's proper supervision, I suppose I could speak to the board. You do that, Thomas said. His tone made it clear the interview was over. The three visitors mounted and rode away. Mrs. Morrison's back rigid with disapproval. As soon as they were out of sight, Clara's brave facade crumbled. She sank onto the porch steps. Shaking, Thomas sat beside her, careful to leave appropriate space between them. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. I've brought you nothing but trouble. Hey now, Thomas said gently. Look at me. When she raised her tear-filled eyes to his, he continued, You've brought me nothing but good. That house was a tomb before you came. Now it's alive again. I won't let them drive you away. We'll make this work. But the mortgage has been paid on time for 15 years and will continue to be. Hartley's just flexing his muscles because Mrs. Morrison's husband is on the bank board. Don't worry about that. And this woman? This Mary? Thomas sighed. Mary Banks is a good woman. Bit fussy, but kind-hearted. She lost her husband last year. Could probably use the work. It might not be the worst thing. Clara nodded slowly. Then, with a maturity beyond her years, we'll be more careful. I'll call you Mr. Reid when others are around. Keep things formal. I don't want to cause more talk. You shouldn't have to, Thomas began. But Clara cut him off. It's all right. I've been the subject of whispers before. At least here. I know they're wrong. That makes it easier to bear. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Patch chase a butterfly across the yard. Finally, Thomas stood. Come on, let's go into town. Use some of that money from the lady at the station. You need winter clothes. And I need to have a word with my sister Ruth. She'll want to hear about this. And she carries more weight in town than Mrs. Morrison would like to admit. Clara stood too, brushing off her skirt. Thomas? What would Margaret really have thought? About me being here? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Looking out at the mountains, Margaret had the biggest heart of anyone I ever knew. He said finally. She would have taken one look at you and insisted you stay. Then she would have marched into town and given Mrs. Morrison a piece of her mind about Christian charity and the proper treatment of children. A small smile tugged at his lips. She was fierce when it came to protecting those who needed it. She sounds wonderful, Clara said softly. She was. Thomas agreed. And she would have loved you. As they prepared the wagon for the trip to town, Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was her home now, and she would fight to keep it. Not with fists or harsh words, but with dignity, hard work, and the quiet strength she was learning from the man who'd seen her worth when no one else would. The battle lines had been drawn, but Clara was no longer the frightened girl on the train station bench. She had a home, a purpose, and someone who would stand with her against the world. That was worth fighting for. The trip to town proved more eventful than either of them had anticipated. Ruth Reid Simmons was a force of nature, shorter than her brother by a foot, but making up for it in sheer presence. She took one look at Clara, dressed in her mended clothes and 2 large shoes, and immediately went into what Thomas called general mode. This won't do at all, Ruth declared, marching Clara into Morrison's dry goods like a woman on a mission. Thomas Reid, you should be ashamed, letting this child go around, looking like a ragamuffin. She looks fine, Thomas protested. But Ruth was having none of it. She looks like you found her on the side of the road, which I understand isn't far from the truth. No, this won't do. Martha, she called to the shop owner. We need winter clothes for this young lady. Everything from the skin out. Clara tried to protest. I don't need. Hush. Child. You need. And you'll have. My brother can afford it. And even if he couldn't, I could. Now, let's see about some proper boots first. What followed was a whirlwind of measuring, fitting, and selecting. Ruth had definite opinions about everything. The weight of wool needed for Wyoming winters. The importance of proper undergarments. The necessity of having both everyday and Sunday clothes. But I don't go to church, Clara said when Ruth held up a particularly pretty blue dress. You do now, Ruth said firmly. Can't have people talking more than they already are. You'll come with Thomas. Sit with our family. And let everyone see there's nothing improper about this arrangement. Through it all, Thomas stood by the door, occasionally wincing at the mounting pile of purchases but never protesting. When Clara caught his eye, worried about the cost, he just shook his head slightly. Let Ruth have her way. His expression said, Now then, Ruth said when Clara was finally outfitted from head to toe. Let's discuss this Mary Banks situation. They retired to Ruth's parlor, where Clara sat carefully on the edge of a velvet chair, afraid to muss anything in the perfectly appointed room. Ruth served tea in delicate china cups that made Clara terrified she'd drop one. Mary's a good woman, Ruth said, getting straight to the point. Lost her husband last year to a logging accident. She's been taking in washing. But it's hard work for little pay. This position would be a godsend for her. Will she? Clara hesitated, then forged ahead. Will she try to change everything? Ruth's expression softened. Are you worried she'll upset your routine, take over your place? Clara nodded, unable to voice her deeper fear that she'd be pushed aside again, made invisible in what had become her home. Mary's not like that, Ruth assured her. She's gentle, perhaps a bit too inclined to see the best in everyone. If anything, you'll need to make sure she doesn't work too hard. She tends to forget she's not as young as she used to be. The important thing, Thomas added, is that she's there to satisfy the gossips. The running of the house stays as it is. Clara's in charge of the kitchen and the household. Mary's there to chaperone, I suppose. Ridiculous that it's needed, Ruth said with a sniff. But then, Amelia Morrison has always been a troublemaker. Jealous, if you ask me. Jealous? Clara asked. Oh yes. She had her cap set for Thomas years ago, before he met Margaret. Never forgave him for choosing someone else. Now she sees a chance to make trouble, and she's taking it. This was news to both Thomas and Clara. Thomas looked uncomfortable with the revelation, while Clara filed it away as another piece of the puzzle. They spent the rest of the afternoon in town, stopping at the feed store, the blacksmith, and finally the bank. Mr. Hartley was all politeness when Thomas made his mortgage payment, but Clara caught the speculative looks he gave her. On the ride home, with Clara wearing her new boots and a warm coat that actually fit, she asked, Why didn't you tell me about the mortgage? Didn't seem necessary to worry you with it. Thomas said, Ranch has been paid for years. But I took a loan 2 years ago to buy more cattle. Improve the breeding stock. It's manageable. Unless the bank calls it in early. Thomas glanced at her, surprised by her understanding. You know about such things? I listened when I lived with the Garretts. Mr. Garrett was always talking about loans and interest and banks foreclosing. Said it was how rich men stole from poor ones. All legal-like. He wasn't entirely wrong, Thomas admitted, but I've been careful. The ranch is solid. The loan's more than half paid. They'd have no grounds to call it in unless you gave them one by taking in a disreputable orphan. Clara finished. You're not disreputable, Thomas said firmly. And tomorrow Mary Banks starts, which should shut down most of the gossip. We'll be fine. But Clara noticed he gripped the reins a little tighter, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested he wasn't as confident as he sounded. That evening, as Clara prepared supper in her new clothes, keeping one of her everyday dresses on despite Ruth's insistence she wear the better ones, she found herself thinking about the complexities of her new life. In some ways, it was simpler than before. She had food, shelter, kindness. But in other ways, it was far more complicated. There were expectations now, people watching, judging. Her actions could affect not just her but Thomas too. "Penny for your thoughts," Thomas said, coming in from the evening chores. Clara smiled. He'd taught her that expression just last week. Just thinking about how complicated simple things can be. "Ah," Thomas said, washing his hands at the pump. Like how taking in a young girl to help with chores has somehow become a scandal worthy of the bank's attention? Something like that. Thomas dried his hands thoughtfully. "Clara, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens, with the bank, with Mary, with the town gossips, you have a home here. I gave my word, and I keep it." Clara's throat felt tight. "Even if it costs you the ranch? It won't come to that," Thomas said. "But even if it did, some things matter more than land and cattle. Doing right matters. Keeping promises matters. You matter." Clara had to turn back to the stove to hide the tears that threatened. No one had ever said she mattered before. Not like that. Not like they meant it. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Thomas said quietly. "Thank you for reminding me that there's more to life than just surviving. Margaret would say I'd been doing too much of one and not enough of the other." They ate supper in companionable silence, both thinking about tomorrow and the changes it would bring. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the world in white and covering all the rough edges with pristine beauty. "Snow," Clara said wonderingly, moving to the window. "I've seen it before, but never like this. Never so clean and perfect." Thomas joined her at the window, careful to maintain appropriate distance. "First snow always looks like that, like the world's getting a fresh start." "Maybe we are too," Clara said softly. "Maybe we are," Thomas agreed. As they watched the snow fall, each lost in their own thoughts. Neither noticed the rider on the ridge above the ranch, watching the warm light spilling from the windows. The man sat there for a long moment, then turned his horse and rode away into the gathering storm. But he would be back. The past, Clara was about to learn, had a way of finding you no matter how far you ran. Mary Banks arrived the next morning like a whirlwind of nervous energy and good intentions. She was younger than Clara had expected, perhaps 35, with prematurely gray streaks in her brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Which was often. "You must be Clara," she said, barely through the door before extending her hand. "Ruth told me so much about you. I hope we'll be good friends." Clara shook the offered hand cautiously. In her experience, adults who wanted to be friends usually wanted something else. "Now then," Mary continued, looking around the kitchen with approval. "Ruth said you've been managing the household yourself. I don't want to step on any toes. Why don't you show me your routine? And we'll figure out how I can help without getting in your way?" This was so unexpected that Clara found herself warming to the woman despite her reservations. As the morning progressed, it became clear that Mary was exactly what Ruth had described: kind, hardworking, and genuinely interested in making the arrangement work for everyone. "I'll be honest," Mary said as they folded laundry together. "I need this position. The washing work is killing my hands, and winter's coming. But I won't pretend to be here to supervise you. You're doing a fine job on your own." "Then why did you agree to come?" Clara asked. Mary's smile was sad. "Because I know what it's like to have people whisper about you. After my William died, there were those who said I must have done something to deserve it. As if God punishes women by taking their husbands. She shook her head. Stupid. Cruel talk. But it hurts all the same. Clara found herself telling Mary about the scene at the train station. About Mrs. Morrison's visit. About her fears of bringing trouble to Thomas. Mary listened without interrupting, her hands never pausing in their work. Amelia Morrison is a bitter woman, Mary said finally. But she has influence. We'll have to be smarter than her. She gave Clara a conspiratorial smile. Lucky for us. That's not hard to do. They established a routine quickly. Mary arrived after dawn, helped with breakfast and morning chores, then spent the bulk of the day on household tasks, mending, washing, preparing meals. She always left before dark, maintaining propriety, while giving Thomas and Clara their evenings. This is nice, she said one afternoon as they worked on putting up preserves. Having another woman to talk to. I've missed it. Clara, who had never really had female companionship, found herself enjoying it too. Mary taught her things, not just household skills, but social graces. The subtle ways women navigated the world. When someone insults you politely, Mary explained, you smile sweetly and thank them. Then you say something that sounds like a compliment but isn't. Watch, why Mrs. Morrison? What a lovely dress. I admire a woman who isn't afraid to wear the same style for so many years. It shows real character. Clara giggled. That's wicked. That's survival. Mary corrected. Men fight with fists. Women fight with words. Best to be armed. 2 weeks into this new arrangement, Thomas pronounced himself satisfied. The house ran smoothly. The gossip had died to a manageable level, and Clara had an ally in Mary. Even the bank had backed off, with Hartley sending word that the board was satisfied with the current arrangements. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the past finally caught up with Clara. Mary had left early for a dentist appointment in town, and Clara was alone in the kitchen, kneading bread, when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her blood turned to ice. She knew that sound, knew what it meant. Through the window, she saw them. 4 riders, led by a man she'd hoped never to see again. Jake Garrett, the son of the family who'd abandoned her at the train station. Clara's hands stilled on the dough. Jake was 25, handsome in a rough way, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He'd made her life miserable in the months she'd lived with his family, always finding excuses to corner her, to touch her arm, to whisper things that made her skin crawl. She watched him dismount, saw him gesture to his companions to wait, watched him stride toward the house like he owned it, like he owned her. The knock on the door was loud, demanding. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, mind racing. Thomas was in the far pasture. I wouldn't be back for hours. She was alone. Clara. Girl. I know you're in there. Jake called. Open up. We need to talk. She moved to the door but didn't open it. What do you want? Jake? That's no way to greet family, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Come on. Clara. Open the door. I've come a long way to find you. We're not family, Clara said firmly. Your mother made that clear when she left me at the station. Now, that was a misunderstanding, Jake said. Ma was just frustrated. Times were hard. But they're better now. And we want you to come home. Clara almost laughed. Home? The place where she'd slept in the barn half the time because Jake wouldn't leave her alone in the house? I have a home, she said. And work. I'm not going anywhere with you. The silence that followed was ominous. Then Jake's voice came again. Harder now. Clara. To be reasonable. You're still a minor. Ma's your legal guardian. She sent me to fetch you back. She gave up any claim when she abandoned me. Did she? Because I don't recall any legal papers being signed. Do you? Clara's heart sank. He was right. There had been no formal arrangement, just abandonment and rescue. Mr. Reid will be back soon, she said, trying to sound confident. The old man who bought you? Yeah, I heard about that. Quite the scandal in town. What I hear. Man his age. Girl, your age. All alone out here. Makes people wonder what's really going on. Nothing's going on, Clara said hotly. He gave me work. A safe place. Safe? Jake laughed. Honey, you don't know what safe means. But you come with me now. Kiet like. And I'll make sure Ma forgives you for running off. Otherwise, I'll have to get the law involved. Claim you were stolen. Taken advantage of. Won't look good for your Mr. Reid. Clara's mind raced. She could see the trap closing. If she went with Jake, she knew what awaited her. At best, servitude. At worst, she didn't want to think about worst. But if she refused, he could make trouble for Thomas. Serious trouble. I need to leave a note, she said finally, so he doesn't worry. No noches, Jake said sharply. You come now, or I come in and get you. Clara heard the other men dismounting. They heard their boots on the porch. She was trapped. Then, from somewhere behind the house, came Patch's bark. Not his usual, friendly greeting, but the sharp, warning bark he reserved for threats. And another sound. Hoofbeats. A single rider. Coming fast. Clara. It was Thomas's voice. And it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. You in there, Thomas? She called back. Jake Garrett's here. He says. The door shook as Jake tried to force it. Open up. Girl. Or I'll. The sentence was cut short by the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. Step away from my door, Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. All of you. Now. Clara peered through the window. Thomas sat his horse with his rifle trained on Jake, who had indeed stepped back, hands raised slightly. Now, Mister, Jake said, trying for reasonable. No need for guns. I'm just here to collect what's mine. Nothing here is yours. Thomas said. The girl works for me. And she's under my protection. She's a runaway. Jake insisted. My mother's her guardian. Your mother abandoned her at a train station with a note begging strangers to feed her. Thomas said. Any claim she had ended there. That's not how the law sees it. Then we'll let the law decide. Sheriff Banks is a friend of mine. We'll ride to town right now. All of us. And let him sort it out. But Clara stays here unless she chooses to go. Clara opened the door then. Stepped onto the porch. I'm not going anywhere with you. Jake. Not now. Not ever. Jake's facade of reasonableness cracked. You little he started toward her. But stopped when Thomas shifted the rifle. Clara. Thomas said, not taking his eyes off Jake. Go inside. Lock the door. But, now, Clara. She retreated, but stayed by the window, watching. The standoff stretched taut. 4 men, against 1. But Thomas held the high ground, mounted, armed, and with the righteousness of his position. Finally, Jake spat in the dirt. This isn't over, he said. I'll be back with the law. And then we'll see who has claims on who. You do that? Thomas said evenly. But you come on my land again without the sheriff. And I'll treat you like the trespasser you are. That's a promise. Jake and his men mounted up. But before they rode off, Jake called out. Ask her about the silver. Reid. Ask her what happened to Ma's silver spoons. Then they were gone. Dust settling in their wake. Thomas waited until they were well away before dismounting and coming to the house. Clara met him at the door. Shaking. How did you know to come back? She asked. Patch. Thomas said simply. Saw him running toward the far pasture, barking his head off. Figured something was wrong. He looked at her carefully. You all right? Clara nodded, then shook her head. Jake Garrett. He's the son of the family who had me last. He says his mother wants me back. That she never gave up guardianship. We'll deal with that if it comes to it, Thomas said. What did he mean about silver spoons? Clara's face flushed. Mrs. Garrett lost some spoons. Laramie said I stole them to pay for food. I didn't. But Jake said he'd tell everyone I did, unless I was nice to him. That's when I told Mrs. Garrett I couldn't stay anymore. She was so angry. So she dumped you at the station. Thomas finished, his voice grim. Clara, listen to me. Whatever happened there, whatever they accused you of, you're safe here. We'll fight this. But what if they make trouble for you? What if the bank? Let me worry about that. Thomas said. Right now, we need to send word to Sheriff Banks. Let him know what's happening. And I think it's time to talk to Judge Harper about making your position here official. Oficial how? Thomas hesitated. There are papers that can be drawn up. Guardianship papers. If you're willing, I could petition to be your legal guardian until you're of age. It would protect you from the Garretts and anyone else who might try to claim you. Clara stared at him. You'd do that? Take on that responsibility? Clara, Thomas said gently. I already have. This would just make it legal. She felt tears threaten again. How had she gone from being nobody to being someone worth protecting? Someone worth fighting for? Yes, she said softly. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. Thomas nodded, relief evident on his face. Good. We'll ride to town tomorrow. Talk to the judge. For now, let's get supper started. And Clara, maybe keep the doors locked when I'm not here. Just for a while. She nodded, understanding. The peace they'd built was fragile, threatened now by shadows from her past. But as she watched Thomas tend to his horse, saw the determined set of his shoulders, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Protected, not just safe, but actively protected by someone who thought she was worth the trouble. Jake Garrett had made a mistake coming here. He'd thought he was hunting a frightened girl with no one to stand for her. Instead, he'd found Clara had something he'd never expected, a home. And someone willing to defend her right to it. The battle wasn't over. Clara knew Jake would be back, probably with legal papers and threats. But she wouldn't face him alone. She had Thomas, and Mary, and Ruth, and even Sheriff Banks. She had a community now, people who knew her worth. As she started supper, Clara allowed herself a small smile. Let Jake come. Let him try to drag her back to that miserable existence. He'd learn what she'd learned, that sometimes, family wasn't about blood or legal papers. Sometimes it was about choosing to stand together against whatever storms might come. And together, they would weather this storm too. The judge's chambers smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco, with tall windows that let in the late morning light. Judge Harper, a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire spectacles, listened carefully as Thomas explained the situation. So you see, Your Honor, Thomas concluded, the girl was abandoned with nothing but a note. I've provided her employment and shelter, but now her former family is attempting to reclaim her. Judge Harper leaned back in his chair, studying first Thomas, then Clara. Young lady, he said gently, I need to hear from you. Tell me about your time with the Garrett family. Clara straightened in her chair. She'd worn her best dress, the blue one Ruth had insisted on, and Mary had helped her pin her hair up properly. She looked, Thomas thought, older than her years, but somehow fragile too. They took me in after my parents died. Clara began, her voice steady. I was 8. They weren't cruel. Exactly. Just cold. I worked for my keep, cooking, cleaning, tending the younger children. But when I got older, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Jake, their oldest son, he began to pay attention to me in ways that made me uncomfortable. When I refused his advances, things got difficult. Difficult how? The judge prompted gently. Clara's cheeks flushed. He would corner me when no one was around. Touch my arm, my hair, say things. When some silver spoons went missing, he said he'd tell everyone I stole them unless I was accommodating. And were you? The judge asked. No. See ya. I told Mrs. Garrett I couldn't stay anymore. I think she suspected the truth about Jake. But it was easier to blame me. She said I was ungrateful, that I'd never amount to anything. Then she took me to the train station. Judge Harper made notes. And left you there with this note? He held up the piece of paper Thomas had thought to bring. Yes. See ya. The judge studied the note, then looked at Thomas. Mr. Reid, you have a reputation as an honest man. Your sister Ruth speaks highly of you, as does Sheriff Banks. But I must ask, why take in this girl, a young woman, not related to you, with your wife deceased? Thomas met his gaze steadily. Because it was the right thing to do. Your Honor. Because she needed help. And I had help to give. My wife Margaret and I always wanted a large family. God saw fit to take her and our daughter before that could happen. But I still had a home that echoed with emptiness and a ranch that needed tending litter. Clara needed safety and work. It seemed a fair exchange. And there's been no impropriety? None, Thomas said firmly. Clara has her own room. We've hired Mary Banks as a chaperone to satisfy the gossips. I've treated Clara as I would a daughter or a younger sister, with respect and appropriate distance. Judge Harper turned back to Clara. Is this true? Do you feel safe in Mr. Reid's home? Safer than I've ever felt anywhere. Clara said without hesitation. Mr. Reid has been nothing but kind and proper. He's given me work, dignity, a chance to be more than just a burden. I don't want to go back to the Garretts. I can't. The judge was quiet for a long moment, then began writing. I'm prepared to grant temporary guardianship to Mr. Reid, he said finally. Temporary? Thomas asked. For 6 months. During that time, I'll have the sheriff investigate the Garrett family's claims and treatment of Clara. If at the end of 6 months everything is as you've presented, I'll make the guardianship permanent until Clara reaches her majority. He looked at Clara. At which point, young lady, you'll be free to make your own choices about where and how you live. Thank you, Your Honor. Clara breathed. Don't thank me yet. Judge Harper warned. The Garretts may contest this. There may be a hearing. Are you prepared for that? We are, Thomas said firmly. As they left the courthouse, official papers in hand, Clara felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But their relief was short-lived. Jake Garrett was waiting by their wagon, leaning against it with studied casualness. Well, he said. Been to see the judge? Have we? Thomas stepped slightly in front of Clara. We have, and you'll be interested to know that Clara is now officially under my guardianship. Any claims your family had are null and void. Jake's eyes narrowed. Temporary guardianship. I'd wager. The judge likes his trial periods. He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. 6 months is a long time. Lot can happen in 6 months. Is that a threat? Thomas asked quietly. Just an observation, Jake said. He looked past Thomas to Clara. You always were too proud for your own good. Girl, pride goeth before a fall. Doesn't it? Leave her alone, Mary Banks said, appearing from the general store with Ruth beside her. Or do you only threaten young girls when they're alone? Jake's face darkened at being confronted by the women. Ruth, in particular, seemed to intimidate him. Her position in town society was unassailable. "Ladies," he said mockingly, tipping his hat. "Just having a friendly chat with my former foster sister, the girl you tried to assault." "You mean?" Ruth said bluntly. "Oh yes, Clara told us all about it. And I've made sure the right people know too. Your reputation in this town is hanging by a thread. Mr. Garrett, I'd be careful if I were you." Jake's facade cracked, showing the ugly temper beneath. But before he could speak, Sheriff Banks appeared, badge glinting in the sun. "Problem here?" he asked mildly. "No problem, Sheriff," Jake said through gritted teeth. "Just leaving." They watched him stalk away, his shoulders rigid with anger. Sheriff Banks turned to Thomas. "Judge told me about the guardianship. I'll be keeping an eye on things, making sure there's no trouble." "Appreciate it, Jim," Thomas said. As they prepared to leave town, Ruth pulled Clara aside. "You did well in there," she said. "Spoke up clear and proper. I'm proud of you." Clara blushed at the praise. "I was terrified." "Of course you were. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is." Ruth squeezed her hand. "Now, you be careful. Men like Jake Garrett don't give up easily when they think something's been taken from them." The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they turned into the ranch road, Clara finally spoke. "What did Jake mean about a lot happening in 6 months?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "He means he'll try to make trouble. Spread rumors. Maybe try to hurt the ranch's business. He's hoping to pressure us into giving up. Will it work?" Thomas looked at her. This girl who'd been through so much but still stood straight and strong. "No," he said simply. "It won't work. We've got right on our side. And that counts for something. Besides," he added with a small smile, "we've got Ruth on our side too. And that counts for even more." Clara managed a smile in return, but worry still gnawed at her. She'd brought trouble to Thomas's door. Trouble he didn't deserve.